and let you take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Andreas. And thanks everyone for logging in live to this session. It's good that we've got a few of you to talk about occupational psychology. My name's Paul Flaxman. I'm a lecturer here at City in the organisational psychology group. I've previously been program director for the MSc Organisational Psychology. So I have a good insight into the training of occupational and organisational psychologists. And I'm joined by my practitioner colleague, Ross.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Really great that you've come to find out a bit more about what the heck is occupational organizational psychology. And I am one of those. I call myself, we'll come on to this in a bit later, but I call myself an organizational psychologist or sometimes a work psychologist. And I am freelance. I have my own company called People Soup. And I did the master's at City about, it's coming up 6 years ago now. So I work with a variety of individuals and organizations using a particular type of behavioral science, which aims to enhance people's psychological well-being, which is very important in the workplace and particularly in the current climate as we hopefully come out of a pandemic. I also work with leadership groups and teams in organizations to think about how we can create the conditions for collaboration and cooperation. And finally, I also have a podcast called People Soup. So if podcasts are your thing, we will make sure you get a link to the People Soup podcast and also my social media presence.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, so it's handy, I think, that you've got kind of the research side of the discipline and the practitioner side of the discipline as well. So I hope we're going to be able to kind of give you both angles on occupational psychology. Yeah, feel free to use the chat to post questions, and we'll also have space, I think, for some open mic questions and answers as we go through with this small group. So feel free to type away if your questions pop up as we're going through the slides today. Now, before we start rambling about this field, Ross is going to ask you to reflect on a couple of questions using Mentimeter.
I am indeed. So I'm just going to push Paul off sharing his screen. And I'm going to share it with Mentimeter. You may have come across this. You probably have in lectures or in something else. So let me just get to the right page because we've got a couple of questions for you. And here they are. So you can use another window on your browser or you can use your mobile. So if you go to www.menti.com and enter this code, which is 22559070. That's 22559070. And we're interested in what attracts you to the possibility of becoming or exploring further of being an occupational or organizational psychologist. What attracts you to this branch of psychology? So hopefully, let us know if you can't find menti.com or if you're having any trouble, and we'll try our best to assist you. If you go in there and type anything, type your views. This is completely anonymous. So what attracts you to occupational or organizational psychology? Any thoughts? There's our first contribution. It's less spoken about.
It's interesting.
I'm glad you said that because it niggles me a bit that quite often there are things in organizations happening like companies collapsing or people getting very stressed or failures of leadership. And it's not often you see someone like Paul up there being interviewed on the news. Look at the look of panic on his face. But yeah, about where's the evidence around this. I think it's happening a bit more. But keep your thoughts coming. We'll have a look at these. It's linked to work culture and how to improve workers' mindset. Love that. Yeah, there's a great interest in work culture, particularly after the pandemic. A lot of people have got very used to performing their jobs from a home environment, and some of them have loved that, and some of them have found that extremely frustrating and tedious. Some great views coming out. Thank you.
These are really good. I think the culture and the worker's mindset like neatly captures the two angles on the work. So looking at the individual, but also looking at the organization. And we'll talk about this, the idea that it's perhaps helping more functional people to flourish rather than just fixing sort of clinical problems. Yeah.
Because by the time someone enters the realms of almost a clinical levels of distress in the workplace, it takes a lot longer for them to recover and even know there's an issue and seek support. Whereas if we can get those skills in earlier, you've got a much better chance of that person being able to spot signs and perhaps look after themselves and each other more effectively. Any other thoughts? Well, I think we might move on to we got some more coming up. Branches out of typical psychology, more involved in others' occupations. Yeah, and we'll talk a bit more about, I see there's a great benefit in someone like me, an organizational psychologist, pairing myself with, say, a clinical psychologist to do workplace interventions, or pairing myself with an educational psychologist to work in, say, schools. I think there's a really missed opportunity by many organizational psychologists to reach out to other branches of psychology. So I think we'll ask the other question. Let me show you the other question, which is this. So it's staying on Mentimeter. And here it is. What puts you off or makes you uncertain about occupational or organizational psychology? And it's still on menti.com and still the same code, 22559070. So share your views, because it will help us support you and perhaps maybe dispel your fears or your uncertainties, hopefully, or give you at least more information to help you make an informed decision. Oh, crikey, yeah, association with motivational gurus. Yeah, I hear you. They can be quite frustrating for people like me and Paul, those people who don't have much of an evidence base behind what they're saying, but have this kind of guru-like status. Frankly, they're a bit annoying.
It's a powerful statement, though, isn't it? Sort of, the overlap with things like pop psychology and stuff that isn't evidence-based is tricky. It's a fine balance sometimes, yeah.
Someone says sometimes people are hesitant to change their old ways of working. Yeah, and I think that's where my enthusiasm is, that psychology can really help them. It can really help them explore that and think about what's getting in the way for them. Change is a big topic in organizations. Thank you for being so honest. The number of jobs available and the starting salary is a bit low for certain jobs like HR. Understood, yeah. And someone else is saying they haven't come across anything personally, but need to know more about it before you maybe have those uncertainties. So that's thank you for your openness there. And we can come back to these a bit later on just to reflect on them again. So how about we go back to the slides, Paul? Do you think that would be?
Yeah.
I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing some comments there. So I'm trying to multitask here. Yeah. Okay. So here's what we've got planned for the next, I don't know, 30 minutes or so. We're just going to talk you through some of these things really around the discipline. So the professional labels, you get a wide range of labels applied to this area of psychology. I'll talk about the key academic knowledge areas of OP here in the UK. So if you study on a accredited master's program, there's kind of 5 knowledge areas that you'll cover. And then I think between us, myself and Ross, talk a little bit about what OPs actually do, the range of sorts of projects and areas of work that OPs are involved in. And we'll try and sort of flag up the positives of working in this area and talk about career paths for those of you just starting out. So professional labels, a bit of a minefield, this area. You've heard us talking about occupational stroke organisational psychology. Well, those two things are exactly the same. So here at City, we call our MSc organisational psychology, but it allows people to become accredited as an occupational psychologist. So there's these strange different uses of terms. In Europe, it's often called work and organisational psychology. In the US, it's called IO psychology, so industrial and organizational psychology. In the UK, there's an association for business psychology, which is for those people who are not going to become accredited with the BPS, particularly, find a good home there. And certainly my subdiscipline, if you like, thinking about well-being, mental health in the workplace, is called occupational health psychology, which is a merging of occupational health psychology and clinical psychology, really. Yeah, so just a comment, not to get too bamboozled by these terms, they're all talking about the same discipline. In the UK, being an occupational psychologist is the only legally protected title. So you have to be accredited with the BPS to gain that title. Ross, any reflections out in the world about how people use these labels?
Yeah, it's such, I mean, I could talk about this for 40 minutes, but I won't. But as Paul says, occupational is protected. And I personally think it's a bit of a dud name. I can't call myself occupational because I haven't been through the accreditation process with the British Psychological Society. I've chosen not to. And I've still got a lot of work as an organizational psychologist or a work psychologist. I call myself either organizational or work psychologist. For me, the word occupational, people don't understand. If you say it's like an occupational psychologist, people kind of think, oh, well, maybe he's doing stuff around people recovering from significant illness. You're doing some sort of crafts and arts with them, or maybe you're helping people walk again. It's not very clear, I don't think. I think work psychology is clearer. And as I say, I use both work and organizational psychologist for my own practice.
Super, thanks, Ross. So what I've got here, I don't know how clear this slide's coming out for you, but these are around the edge there, the 5 knowledge areas that are taught on master's programs that are accredited by the British Psychological Society here in the UK. So it gives you a sense of what you learn when you're training as an occupational psychologist. So if I start at the top, go round clockwise, one area is called learning, training and development. So in there you have things like designing training programs, coaching, performance coaching in the workplace. Coming around, we have leadership, engagement and motivation. Wellbeing and work, which is about promoting psychological well-being in the workplace. Then we have work design, organizational change and development. That looks at things like culture that one of you mentioned in Mentimeter. Looking at the environment, the work environment, to see how it could be made more healthy for people, more motivating. Then psychological assessment at work is what we call psychometric testing in the workplace. So this is things like personality questionnaires, strengths questionnaires, how to select people into organizations using psychological tools and this kind of thing. So those are the main areas of research and practice in occupational psychology. And in the middle, you can see the joys of research design, advanced data analysis, and also applying psychology to work in the middle. So it's kind of taking theories from psychology and thinking, well, how do we actually apply these in the workplace? So when you run an MSc program in the UK, this is kind of your guide about the sorts of things that you need to be covering. There's plenty of flexibility, but it gives you a sense of what the field involves. So what do occupational psychologists actually do? Well, in psychological assessment, I mentioned psychometric tools. So here you might administer personality questionnaires to people, give them one-to-one feedback on how they come across in their personality, help them to identify their strengths and their values, their leadership style. So this is used in a lot of different aspects of work, like selection, particularly in coaching, for feedback to help people develop their performance, leadership development, and so on. And Ross, I mean, you've done a fair bit of this over your career. Do you want to say anything about this area?
Yeah, I think it's an area that attracts a lot of psychologists. Is this using rigorous, tested questionnaires, instruments, tools, we might call them, to support people in organizations, either for selection or supporting decisions for promotion. So there we might use, if a company, say, like, let's think of a big company, McDonald's, they might have a lot of people applying to them for jobs. So they might have some tests of verbal reasoning and numerical reasoning, for example, and candidates complete those and perhaps a statement or some details, and then they use that as a cutoff to who to invite for the next stage, perhaps for an interview. So if you get above a certain mark on verbal reasoning and numerical reasoning combined, then you'll go forward. So it's a way to sift out a large number of candidates. The way I use it a lot is in leadership recruitment. So I use detailed personality questionnaires, and say for a leadership recruitment, we get down to 5 candidates. I would typically, this example is from central government, so in the Treasury Department. So I would give the candidates a link to complete an online questionnaire, and then I'd analyze the results and have a conversation with the candidates about how they typically be at work. And that conversation is guided by how they filled in that questionnaire. And the reason I'm doing that is for the final interview panel, I give them a detailed report about how this person's likely to be as a leader. And it gives them insights into where they might want to probe further at the final interview, potential areas for development for that candidate. And I'm also using it in leadership training for one of the big 4 accountancy firms. They are using a particular instrument along with an interview, and I'm doing that. And that gives them a report where they can think about their strengths at work, how those strengths can sometimes be in overdrive and become problematic for them, and identifies areas where they can develop. So it can be really useful. It can be satisfying for the psychologist to really support leaders and people in organizations and to make more robust recruitment decisions.
I think it relates to one of the comments popped up on Mentimeter, that in this area you're tending to help people flourish rather than always trying to solve problems. So strengths work is an example of that, helping employees understand what their key strengths are to use them more often in the workplace, which can be very motivating to have your strengths identified by, say, a leader and being encouraged to use those strengths more. Another area is training. So occupational psychologists are involved in helping organizations and departments and teams understand what their training needs are to perform the job better. So we conduct needs analyses, so working out what training is needed and helping the organization design and deliver training programs based on our understanding of things like learning style and the way to facilitate workshops and this kind of thing. One thing I've said to undergraduate students before is look out for jobs in learning and development, because this is often training related work, and that can be very closely related to occupational psychology. And we've had placement students go into learning and development departments in big organizations who are training to be occupational psychologists.
And I think just on that one, human resources can often be really looking out for psychologists to join, because psychologists tend to have the rigor and the approach of, I'm going to measure this, I'm going to evaluate its effectiveness. And that's a real bonus for human resources, I would say.
Recruitment and selection, I think, probably traditionally is what occupational psychology has been most known for. So that's helping organizations select the right people for the right jobs. And that's been done with various tools. So people like us study interviews to see how valid they are. Look at things like assessment centers, where you'll be asked to perform probably a team task and you're observed by the recruiters. And then, of course, psychometric tests, so ability tests, personality tests are utilized in the workplace. One-to-one coaching, I think I'll hand over to Ross, because you do a lot of coaching, don't you, Ross?
Yeah, so it's a big area for psychologists. And if you're thinking about organizational, occupational psychology, I'd really encourage you to think about one-to-one coaching. I do quite a lot I tend to focus on leaders and emerging leaders, supporting them in their leadership journey to really think about how they're showing up as leaders, how they really want to be as an authentic leader, not trying to fit them in a box, but this is how you should be, but allowing their individual style to flourish. And coaching is an interesting art and science. It's quite a crowded market. And I think as a psychologist, you have an advantage, because you can say, I am a coaching psychologist, and that distinguishes us from other coaches. We hopefully bring an evidence-based rigor to what we do and the way we work with our clients. And just as a sort of side note, coaching is about helping your coaching client get different perspectives on problems, their own personality, their own development, thinking about how they can develop more flexibility while staying true to who they are. It's not about the coach telling the answer. It's not saying, oh, I've got the answer to that, to your coaching clients. That's not what coaching is. It's supporting the client to develop, have breakthrough moments, go away and experiment and try stuff. So it's not just someone who's perhaps more experienced, who has got psychological knowledge, giving them the answers. It's really supporting them. It's encouraging them to develop. It's holding them accountable to their development plans and what they want to achieve. So it can be very rewarding and interesting. You get to see different areas. For instance, I've coached people in pharmaceutical, in tech companies, in government, in the NHS, and you get insights into the differences, but also the similarities between leaders in different areas.
Thanks, Ross. Another area, just a couple more of these, around organizational development and change. And somebody touched on this in Mentimeter by talking about culture. So, changing culture is a complex thing to do, helping people navigate change, facilitate change. One thing I'll say, for example, the way that we teach facilitation of change on the MSc is it's highly participative. So that means we don't go into the organization thinking we're the experts. We treat the people doing the jobs that are going to change as the experts, because they have the knowledge about what will work and what don't. And we harness their expertise to facilitate change. And a very famous organizational psychologist called Edgar Schein, he says that really what we're very good at is being helping. That's what psychologists do. They're experts at being helping. And I really like the way he talks about facilitating change, because it's trying to work out how can we be helpful to a system we're coming into as an outsider. So it's a tricky area of work, but it's fascinating thinking about how systems change, how groups change.
And this area is particularly fascinating and worthy of lots more research. When you think about organizations that are going global, so perhaps they've spread around the globe, how do you relate the different cultures? How can you help someone in Sweden speak effectively to someone in Brazil and someone in India, given that they'll have different cultural norms in how they communicate, how they reach agreement, how they make decisions, how they view their position in the company? It's absolutely fascinating. And this is why it's so essential that we don't go in and say, oh, this worked in this organization, this approach worked in this organization, so it's going to work in yours. And that's not the way to approach it, because the context could be completely different. The culture could be completely different. And it's just such a fascinating thing to explore in organizations if you get the chance.
I don't know how much you come across positive psychology topics in the undergraduate program yet. It may be to come, but you see the bottom of this slide here. Positive psychology has a massive influence on the practice of organizational psychology. And one area is organizational change, an approach called appreciative inquiry. And what it does is when we're looking to change a system, we don't look at what's wrong with the system. We look at what's right with the system. When have things gone well in this system? And you use the positive to harness change. And that can help to overcome a lot of resistance. So there's really interesting paradigm shifts you see in occupational psychology as well, with positive psychology having a lot of influence more recently. What else have we got? Finally, an area that Ross and I work in is employees' well-being and mental health. So this can involve looking at the design of the work, how the work is managed, to see if it's affecting people's well-being, giving people more autonomy over their work. Things where you see the influence of clinical and counseling psychology in work psychology. So we evaluate mindfulness-based training programs in the workplace, strengths-based programs where people are trained to become aware of their strengths and use them more often. So often it's good to have occupational psychologists involved in these programs, not just clinical counseling psychologists. And then area that we do a lot of research on here at City is helping people recover more effectively in between periods of work. So things like burnout are often caused by lack of recovery in between very demanding periods of work. So helping people to use their leisure time in a way that enhances their work performance. Again, I think both Ross and I might have different angles on this question. Like, why would you consider OP as a career? We're doing a bit of a selling job today, just to highlight some of the strengths of this area. If I speak first, Ross, shall I hand over to you? You tell me what you think. I think I put these slides together, so I'll go through these points here. One thing you'll notice, you get to use a wide variety of psychological theories. So we use clinical theories in our work. We use positive psychology theories. We use general cognitive psychology theories in what we do. So you can kind of pick from different areas of psychology and what you're learning and think about how to apply those in the workplace. I think somebody's already mentioned this in the Mentimeter. You tend to work with more functional clients than you would within a clinical role. I say typically because you also find people who are struggling in the workplace, and you're often involved in helping those people as well. But generally speaking, you're not dealing with clinical problems day in, day out in the job. Yeah, I mean, we've been through a pandemic, so I don't know how well this applies, but generally speaking, it's quite a strong market in occupational psychology. You can complete a master's and you can go out and find yourself a job that's relevant to occupational psychology, which is attractive, I think. Yeah, and I think more profound is the last point there, is it's a satisfying way of working because people really appreciate psychological input in the workplace. They enjoy training programs we put together. They like to watch how we facilitate team building and change and things like that. And we often leave our techniques and values behind. So it's not like we go in, we do something, we're gone. We're often leaving behind the principles of say, participative organisational change or appreciative inquiry, so that system can carry on using those things after we're gone. So you get a sense that you're making a difference, I suppose. Yeah. So Ross, what would you say to that? Why do you find it, working as a practitioner, it's worth looking at as a career?
I'm gonna start just by giving a very brief history of my career. It's been a long career, so I'm not going to go into everything. But my first degree was in psychology decades ago, and then I moved into the civil service. So working as a civil servant in the UK, and really enjoyed my career there, and ended up in human resources quite quickly, and really enjoyed my time working with different departments. I worked in the Home Office and then the department for the business, and really enjoyed working with different business areas, trying to enhance what they do and the effectiveness of the policies they deliver, and coaching leaders. And then I got to a point where I thought, I want to make more of an impact. So that's when I left the civil service and went back to university to study the MSc with my mate Paul. He wasn't my mate Paul then, he has become since, but he wasn't then. And I was attracted to do the MSc because I really wanted to make more of an impact in the workplace. And fingers crossed, I'm doing that a little bit now. I think that last bullet point on this slide is really important to me, because from the research that me and Paul do, we know that people are suffering in the workplace. People can have borderline clinical levels of distress and things like anxiety and depression. And having worked in many workplaces, I see that. And it can be quite disruptive for the individual because they don't always know where to go and seek help. And also it can be disruptive for all those around them. So I think if we can provide people with the skills to help support themselves, that's something quite profound for me. I get to work with different organizations. I'm fortunate that I have an HR career behind me. So I'm not probably typical, but I was in senior HR roles in government. I had a master's in human resource management, and I'm a fellow of an organization called the Chartered Institute for Personnel and Development, the CIPD. So that's an avenue where I pursued that. And then I wanted to add organizational psychology on top of that. And I love it. I love doing work with leaders and watching them flourish. I love working with groups in the workplace and seeing them develop skills that can help them look after their own well-being more effectively. I love thinking about how we can prepare people for change, because organizations are always changing. And to give people skills to relate to that change and understand it and know what's showing up inside of them is something really, really satisfying for me. And just a note, over the pandemic, I've been busier than I've ever been in my career, because organizations are realizing that it's so important to look after the well-being of their people, because their people are suffering. There's lots of anxiety out there. There's now anxiety about returning to the office, returning to the workplace. Some people are itching to get back to work. Other people are quite cautious and nervous about coming back to work. The whole world of work has changed dramatically. And I think we need even more organizational psychologists to really make some noise out there and support organizations in supporting their people and their people's health, but also making the organization as healthy as possible. I'll get off my little soapbox now, but that's just a little why I would consider a career. Why I have developed my career.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. So just one more slide about the training, and then we'll see if we can get any questions. I could talk a bit about the masters if people are wondering about whether to follow this path. So the usual route to becoming an occupational psychologist in the UK is you do a psychology degree, like I guess most of you are doing, and then you do a master's program, full-time, usually a year, part-time 2 years. If you want to become chartered with a BPS, then it involves a kind of reflective logbook on your development over the sort of 2 to 3 years after your MSc. you keep a log and you submit that to a reviewer who decides whether, you know, you've met the standard. I have to say, you don't have to become a chartered psychologist to work in this area in the UK. Remember all those titles that we used at the beginning: business psychologist, work psychologist. So lots of people don't have psychology backgrounds, or they didn't go through a chartered process to work in this area. So it's not absolutely essential to be chartered, but if you've got the psychology degree, which I guess most of you have, it sort of makes sense, if you can, to follow it through to its natural conclusion, which is to becoming a chartered psychologist, which gives you this strong professional identity. But you can also become a member of the Association of Business Psychologists. You could pursue a HR route through CIPD, who Ross was just talking about. And if you're interested, if you use the career service here at City, it's run by an occupational psychologist. So, you know, they have a good insight into this field and what it can bring to students and starting out in the career. I'm going to stop sharing just to see if anyone's got any questions about the MSc, about the work that we do, any challenges perhaps. Feel free to use the chat if you'd rather not speak to the recording, or if you want to open mic and ask us a question, we'll do our best to answer it. Oh, it's a good question from Krishna.
Oh, Krishna. Yeah. I'm going to give probably a frustrating answer here, Krishna. It depends. There are different levels of the CIPD qualification. I think it goes from associate to, I can't remember all the levels, but there's member, and then there's blah, 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 and then there's, I'm a fellow of that. And I became a fellow after I'd done a master's in human resource management, and after I'd gone through a process of submitting evidence and an application form. So it wasn't an automatic thing. I think the CIPD is highly regarded by people and organizations, but obviously particularly amongst HR professionals. And I think there could be far more interaction, hands across the water, between the CIPD and the British Psychological Society. I think that would be a very positive move to strengthen those bonds between those two organizations.
They're almost like sister career paths, Krishna. It's a strange term to use, but there's a lot of overlap, obviously, between HR and organizational psychology, but also some differences. So it's kind of a choice almost, really, you know, whether you want to follow a HR route, which after psychology is a little bit more unusual. Normally that would be a human resource management degree. But doing the master's does, I think, give you an exemption from some of the CIPD training modules. So it's sort of like the CIPD recognize us, we recognize them. It's kind of that sort of arrangement, even though they're kind of parallel career options. But yeah, have a look into it, Krishna, if you're not sure about sort of HR and occupational psychology. You can go onto the CIPD website, for example. Thank you. That was a very good question.
I had a quick question. Yeah. Well, for Ross, what was the biggest difference that you noticed from going from an HR career to something like to this, to, you know, kind of building your own brand and taking up that different step?
Oh my gosh, great question, Clara. Yeah, going from a stable career where I got paid every month and had a pretty good pension, and leaving that, a lot of people thought I was a bit crackers. But it was something that had really personal meaning for me to really explore what I could do additionally to support organizations and build a brand. So it's a very, very different thing. And I'm still learning every day, which is something that really gives me energy and motivation. And yes, it's scary as well. It's not like knowing that I'll be paid at the end of the month, because I'll be paid when I do work. So it's a very, very different proposition. It's not for everyone. I think possibly early career organizational psychologists, would I recommend? Yeah, I'd recommend you getting some experience either in HR or in an organizational psychology consultancy first, before you thought about maybe branching out on your own. I think that would give you greater credibility and greater potential impact in the marketplace.
Andreas has got a question, again, a HR related question, which is like, is the CIPD more focused on sort of legal stuff than psychologist? And I always hear the term, whether it depends whether you're doing a HR generalist role or a HR procedural job. I don't know, Ross, have you heard these sorts of things before?
Yeah. There is branches of parts of the CIPD do employment law, which is really important for people's rights in the organization. If people do things that are bad, if people break the rules in an organization, I used to have a job in government where I was disciplining people and ultimately dismissing people if they'd brought the department into disrepute, or they'd been doing something with a work computer that you shouldn't be looking at stuff on a work computer, i.e. porn. That's not a thing that's encouraged in organizations. In fact, it's an issue of gross misconduct. So there is a branch of the CIPD, the profession, that is around legal things. There's branches around learning and development. There's stuff around well-being at work. So there's some mirrored things. So CIPD isn't solely about legal stuff. It's very much mirroring the workplace experience.
Okay, yeah, okay. So I got it not quite right. I always thought like HR, CIPD is like the boring stuff. Organizational psychology is the more interesting stuff. And if you do some of the CIPD, it's more about, Andreas, how many days on vacation do you have left? And here's your work contract and all that, where I think like, I mean, some people love that. I think like, oh my God. And then I always thought like the organizational, occupational, work psychology stuff is the more interesting stuff of actually working with people and helping developing them. It seems there's more overlap than in my sophisticated worldview thought. I need simple metaphors. Yeah, that's like.
I would say the positive message that I'm getting from this is you see the options that you have in these fields after a psychology degree. You know, like going into HR looks really good. So if you've had a HR job for a year, plus your psychology degree, you'd be a very strong candidate to get on an MSc in occupational psychology. So, even though we're sister disciplines, we look very favorably upon HR because we know if you're in HR, you're doing this kind of stuff like training, learning and development, change, this kind of thing. Yeah.
But I would say there is more exciting stuff to be done in occupational organizational psychology. I do agree with Andreas. And there's some bits of HR that are just tedious and dull, in my opinion. And some people love it. Things like how much to pay people. How do you work out how much to pay someone who does a particular job? Or how do you process the payroll? How do you do pension? Or how do you develop policy on sick leave or grievance procedure? That for me is all a bit dull, but really supporting practically humans at work is really something that does float my boat. And that's one of the reasons I left HR to go into in a different direction.
Okay, good. So I'm not completely off with my HR. Okay, it's just once in a while HR people also do. And some people, I think, like I always said, like you just have to figure out what you like. I think some people really like that, right? To kind of have a policy, have it develop, sick leave. This is how we do it. There's it's important for organizations. Just not really something for me.
Yeah. Any other questions coming up about the training or what would be the route to clinical psychology? All right. I think this is the wrong talk, Selena. This one's about occupational.
I mean, I can, hi Selena, I can just quickly answer. I think the easier thing to do is to go on our events page and listen to the talk, How to Become a Clinical Psychologist. We have a whole talk by a clinical psychologist who walks you through it. It's quite simple. And she tells you also about what Ross and Paul did for organizational occupational psychology, about what a clinical psychologist does every day and so forth. So, yeah. And she's really good, Amanda. So it's a lovely talk as well. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, but great thing Selena's doing there, like looking at the different routes into the different professions, you know, because it's quite confusing coming out of a psychology degree. One thing that's happened is you're starting to see doctorates appear in occupational psychology now. So professional doctorates, where you, over at Birkbeck, they're doing one where you've kind of got everything all wrapped up together and you get to a doctorate level. So you call yourself a doctor of occupational psychology.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. So it looks more like the, I don't know, educational, counseling, forensic, the clinical. Okay. Yeah. I always liked that about organizational psychology. I didn't have to do a doctorate. I felt that, I don't know. But yeah,
you don't have to. It's fairly early days, but I think it's just because it is different to clinical and counselling, where you have to have the doctorate to call yourself that. But in Oxide, you don't have to have that. Yeah.
No, right.
Yeah.
I think if there are no more questions, then I'd like to thank you both. That was very, very interesting. I again learned something new. I stick to my simple metaphor: HR boring, organizational psychology interesting. But we'll maybe allude to the gray areas of that comparison. And thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it for taking the time and doing this session and the recording. And I'm looking forward to sharing it with more students, and talk soon.
Great. Thanks everyone for joining. Cheers,
Thanks
Andreas.
for joining us, folks. Cheers.
See you. Bye.